Created in these moments to show us that God will test and reaffirm our faith. It's one thing I do know, Chuck, is the fact that if we walk or if we talk about God a whole lot and say we believe in him and people are listening to us, you can bet that God's not going to let you just talk about it. He's going to make sure you're walking in it so that others can see it. And so you're going to go through some things that will test your very faith. It happens to us. It's going to happen. If it hasn't, it does. And that's what builds our character and who we are. It causes us to grow in faith, to prove we are not mercenaries, professors of faith. Yet, when I trust in him was the big moment. And then in slaying time, we talked about when God is testing us, that we ought to believe him, rely in and on him, depend on him, lean on him, and hold on to him. And then we use Jesus as our example, which brings us to where we are today. Job 13. 20 through 27. And if you brought your Bible, here we'll read for you from the King James Version, Job 13, 20 through 27. Job picks up in continuation of his dialogue with he's talking to God, by the way, which is critical, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. He says, listen, only do not two things unto me, then I will not hide myself from thee. Withdraw thy hand far from me, and let not thy dread make me afraid. Then call thou, and I will answer, or let me speak, and answer thou me. How many are mine iniquities and sins? Make me to know my transgressions and my sin. Wherefore hidest thou thy face, and holdest me for thine enemy? Wilt thou break a leaf driven to and fro, and wilt thou pursue the dry stubble? For thou writest bitter things against me, and makest me to possess the iniquities of my youth. Thou puttest my feet also in stocks, and lookest narrowly upon all my paths. Thou settest a print upon the heels of my feet. And he said, as a rotten thing consumeth as a garment that is moth-eaten. Before we get into all of that, let me just ask a question just for some mental gymnastics, I call it, Chuck, is opening up. In the courtroom setting, I want to ask you a question and think about this. Is Job the plaintiff, the defendant, or the judge in this very moment? And there's a word on here that you should catch that should tell you which one he is. And let me ask you this, and who is God? And this case is a courtroom setting. Is Job the plaintiff, the defendant, or the judge? And what is God's role in this conversation? Just think for a moment. And look at the board. It's right in the intro. Who makes an appeal?
Oh, Job is.
Yeah, but who is he in the courtroom setting? Who would he be? Think about it. Who would appeal?
Plaintiff? No.
Think about it.
Be one out one.
Who would, if the plaintiff is bringing the case, who's the other one? Yeah, Job is the defendant.
He's defending
himself. He's defending what is happening to him. And he's appealing it to God. Now, here's the funny thing, Chuck. Watch this, Russell. God is the judge and the plaintiff. In Job's mind. He's already turned his friends off. He says, you know, I'm done with y'all. Let me turn to who I know is the cause of this. And oftentimes we miss the truth of it is the fact that God, as Henrietta is putting it so well the last couple of weeks, Chuck, is helping me out in this moment we're in, he's in control of everything.
Amen. So
why not just take it to him? I wouldn't spend time talking to my friends or foes or enemies if they don't understand and I know God hasn't sent them. I'd rather just go straight to him. And oftentimes we go over looking for things here and there and everywhere. Just turn right to him and ask him. And so this is a unique conversation, that Job brings in. And this is something that took my attention, darling, immediately. Excuse me. Job says, is sin the cause of my suffering? Excuse me, I got something. Get off me, Satan. You ever asked God that question? Isn't that powerful? He wants to know. And this is how honest he is in his integrity, because he believes he's blameless to the point where he knows he has sin in his life, but he thinks he has done everything he can to make the slate even with God, and this shouldn't be happening. He shouldn't be suffering. And so he asked him, is this sin the cause of my suffering? So what he does is he clears his mind before he appeals his case. Have you ever thought about that? You ever have somebody just run up on you and they want to talk to you about something, and you and them are involved in the moment, and you're the cause of something that's happening to them, and they just start talking at you, and it don't make no sense? Like, what are you talking about? Instead of clearing your mind, gathering yourself, let me clear the air. Listen, the only reason we know, and this is powerful, we know he's talking to God. There's one word in here that we know he's talking to God. Which one is it? Who else can deal with it? Yeah, God is the only one who can deal with our sin. Because sin, as David put it in the Psalms, against thee and thee only have I sinned. So he's in the right courtroom. He's got the judge, God, and he believes God's the plaintiff because God is bringing all of this suffering upon him. And he wants to deal with it. And he has an appeal that he wants God to hear. Yeah, this is powerful. Watch how this gets hot real quick. So watch this. He says, only do not two things unto me. He's cleared his mind now, since this has been dealt with. He says, okay, only two things, God, I don't want you to do unto me. He says, look, this is funny, Chuck, because I thought this was humorous. He says, then I will not hide myself. Where are you going to hide from God? But what he's saying is, in essence, he's saying here, to hide himself is, I will not remove myself from your presence. This is powerful. Oh, man, this is powerful. So watch this. He says, withdraw thy hand. And immediately, darling, my mind went off. I just went off. Can you imagine if God took his hand from you?
Ooh, I wouldn't want to be there.
Can you imagine that, Russell? Even though things, how can I put it? I watched Tony Evans this morning. He was powerful. Tony Evans out of Dallas, Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship. He was talking about the providence of God. This is how timely that was for me this morning to hear it reconfirmed, Chuck. He says, if God ever took his hand from us, his providential care, can you go without God's providential care? Mm-mm. He provides. As much as some people think it's us on our own, if we stop breathing his air, we're done. That's just a small thing. But think about this. He says, withdraw thy hand. He doesn't want God to withdraw his hand from him. I just thought about that, daughter, for a minute. And Russell, I just sat there saying, can you imagine if God withdrew his hand from you? Only two things. Watch this. And so the hand, he says, far from me. He's thinking about his personal relationship with God. And then my mind went here and says, listen, there are two aspects to God, Chuck, that we know are true. Watch this. His heart and his hand. Two important things about God. His heart is bent towards you. His hand, listen, here, I hear you, darling. I'll be there in a minute. But watch this. Everybody, most people, let me rephrase that. Most people want to seek his hand. They want what they can get from him. But they never really have an interest in his heart. Darling, you want to say something?
I want it all. I want both.
Yeah, you want all of it.
I mean, for me, God is as much of a necessity. He's the air that I breathe.
Amen.
He's everything.
Yeah.
He's it.
Without him, think about that. There's a sermon I just put away this a few minutes ago. It was in my other Bible. I was going to bring it. Not the sermon, but the Bible. I said, I don't really need that. But let me put it, and the sermon is without Jesus. And I thought about that when I was thinking about this here. Imagine it without him. And so here
I wouldn't want to live.
Yeah. And some people do live without him. Or they think they're living.
As a nation, we're pretty close to that.
Yeah. We've got
Scary, isn't it?
Further and further.
Further, and look at, and before I almost put my whole card. I almost got to the end of the message, but let me hold up the teaching. But hold that thought, and I'll come back in about a half hour, 40 minutes. Yeah, think about what you just said, and how powerful that ties in, and where Job is, and where he is now, because he feels as though his hand is far from him. Listen, we know God has his heart on Job because we read it. Have you tried my servant Job? We know his heart, where his heart is. And here's something I've learned, that I remember years ago, when it came to Jacob. Jacob was working to marry Rachel. You know the story?
Yeah,
And
he
Laban
was
tricked
supposed to
him?
work
7 years? Right.
And then the father did the switcheroo and
Yep.
on his wedding night gave him Lee instead of
Leah.
Rachel.
Absolutely.
And he said, well, you finish out this week with her and then you work another 7 years and you can have,
Rachel.
because it wasn't the custom to let the younger one be married before the older daughter.
Awesome.
And he didn't know on the wedding night that
Leah.
it was Lee he was with
Right.
instead of the one he loved.
Yep. Great point. And Laban, the uncle, tricked him. But
Laban, he was a shady guy.
here's what these names mean. Watch where I'm going with this. Leah means holiness. And this came to my mind real quick when I was preparing. Rachel, watch this, Chuck, is happiness. You know what God was saying? You can't have happiness before you have holiness. You have to have Leah first before you get Rachel. Powerful moment. Even though their custom was you have to marry the older first, here's what God was saying in his wisdom in that moment. You can't have Rachel first. And this is something the world has to understand. Watch this. The world is after happiness, but they don't want holiness. See, they believe happiness, man, I could mess with this all day. Happiness comes from God's hand. Holiness comes from his heart. But you have to have holiness first before you get to happiness. So I'd rather be married, now that I know it, before I wanted the same thing, I wanted Rachel. She was pretty to look at. She was a knockout.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
She was,
yeah.
And something about Leah was not
Not as attractive. Yeah, and that's in the scriptures.
Right.
When you look at Leah, you're like, oh my God. But you look at Rachel, you're like, yeah, man, for real. But God says, you know what? Rachel represents holiness, happiness.